Sony just released a lens that replaces a lot of their other lenses. This is the new 50-150 with a constant f2 aperture. And if you can afford it, you may not need to buy any of their tight lenses because it is truly exceptional. Spoiler for how I feel about this lens out of the way. For the sake of ethics, I want you to know this video is not paid or sponsored by Sony, and while they have sent me this lens to test and review, I will sadly be having to return it to them shortly. With that out of the way, the first thing you'll notice about this lens is the size. Keeping in mind that it is an f2 zoom lens with a pretty wide focal range, Sony has managed to keep the size and weight pretty manageable in my opinion. The length is the same as their 70-200 f2.82, and when it comes to the weight, it's a little heavier, coming in at 1,338 grams or about 2.9 pounds. The biggest difference between this lens and the 70-200 as well as other Sony lenses is going to come down to the girth and diameter. It is quite a thick lens that honestly reminds me of one of Canon or Nikon's new beefy lenses. But whenever you consider how much light this 50-150 is made to let in, this really isn't surprising, and it's still comfortable to use with a well-balanced weight that works well for handheld, but you're probably going to be better off using it with a monopod or tripod. Thankfully, and similar to the 70-200, this lens comes with a collar that rotates. You can mount it directly to a tripod if you need to, and also, just like the 70-200, it has an internal zoom, meaning that the barrel does not extend in and out and shift the weight whenever you change your zoom, which is great. In addition, because this is a GM lens, it gets all the features you would expect from a lens like this. So you get 3 programmable buttons all around it. You get an autofocus manual focus switch, an aperture control ring that you can make clickless. The controls are great. It even comes with a full-time DMF switch, which you can enable to instantly switch to manual focus by rotating the focus ring. And you also get this cute little lens hood that is dramatically smaller than something you would see on the 70-200. And while I'm not a lens hood guy, like I said, it's cute. It looks really good on the end of the lens. Likewise, I have no complaints about the image quality either. Just like with all other modern Sony lenses, the footage is absolutely gorgeous to look at. The bokeh looks extremely beautiful, and let me just say, I'm a die-hard lover of Sony's 135 f1.8 GM lens. I think it's one of the most gorgeous portrait lenses that you can put on their cameras, and it's so sharp, and it gives the image a really eye-popping 3D effect that you really only see in the 51.2 GM also. You don't see it with many other lenses, but that said, somehow they got this 50-150 to have the same effect. The sharpness and 3D effect, especially over 100 millimeters, really pops, and it's crazy to me that they got this lens to be this sharp while also being a zoom. It's extremely impressive. Autofocus is also great, and I found it to be fast and reliable. I haven't had any complaints about Sony autofocus with any of their lenses for many years at this point. Focus breathing is very slight too, and the good news is that this lens also supports focus breathing compensation, which all of Sony's newer cameras support, so you shouldn't need to worry about focus breathing anyways. And more great news, Sony says that this lens also has a linear manual focus, meaning that when you adjust the focus ring manually, the lens is going to act like a non-electronic lens. Back in the day, some of Sony's lenses would dramatically ramp up or slow down the manual focus speed depending on how quickly you rotated the focus ring, but they've done away with that with this lens. It's just a normal linear manual focus, and that's really appreciated. Now, do you want to hear a bit of sad news about this lens though? I'll tell you a bit of sad news. Unfortunately, this lens does not support teleconverters. I know, it'd be the perfect lens for it. Imagine putting a 2x teleconverter on the end of this thing, making it a 100 to 300 millimeter f4 lens. It would be so good. Sadly though, it won't fit a teleconverter. They said the glass is a little bit too close for a 2x teleconverter. Unfortunately, sorry about that. Now, let's talk about how you would actually use this lens as a filmmaker. For me, as someone who's filmed a lot of weddings and interviews in my life, let me just tell you, this lens excels in these 2 areas. For a wedding, you're always going to need a longer lens for a wedding ceremony, and while this has traditionally been the realm of the 70-200 millimeter lens, I think this new 50-150 could work very well if you find yourself filming a lot of wedding ceremonies where you can get relatively close to the front of the aisle for the couple. Alternatively though, if you're commonly finding yourself filming Catholic weddings or weddings in churches where you have to stand in the balcony, this lens may not be the best and may not give you the closest that you need on the tight end. In that case, go back to the 70-200. personally, when filming elopements to cut back on the size and amount of lenses in my bag, I've opted to bring along a 135mm instead of a 70-200, and then simply moved my tripod around to adjust my framing. While this 50-150 is definitely larger than the 135, I do feel like it would work extremely well for a videographer that films a lot of elopements, because you have a lot of versatility and you're replacing a lot of longer lenses with this one lens. Now, when it comes to filming interviews, on the other hand, that is where this lens gets extremely compelling as well, because I usually prefer to film my interviews with a 2-lens setup, typically using a prime lens at 50mm and a 70-200mm lens at anywhere from 70-100mm off to the side for some focal length variety that I can cut between the two shots. With this 50-150, it can really fulfill both of those lens requirements, and while I wouldn't necessarily recommend buying 2 of them, if you wanted some extra versatility in terms of focal length while still being able to get an ultra shallow depth of field at f2 like you would with a prime lens, this is a really compelling option for interviews. And regardless of whether you're someone who films weddings or interviews or anything else for that matter, think about the versatility of having a lens with this 50-150 focal range and constant f2 aperture. If you commonly find yourself not only using the 70-200 like we talked about earlier, but also an 85, 100mm, 135mm, this lens can essentially replace all of them while giving you a shallow depth of field that much more closely mimics a prime lens. It's kind of wild. Then, let's talk about Sony's other f2 zoom lens that they recently released, the 28-70 f2. Back in the day, filmmakers and photographers talked about the holy trinity of lenses from companies like Nikon. Those comprised of a 14-24mm f2.8, a 24-70 2.8, and a 70-200 2.8. If you had these 3 lenses, you had a massive focal range covered, all at 2.8, which would serve you incredibly well. To be clear, Sony has not built out their trinity yet, and these 2 lenses do not have nearly the same amount of focal range, but keep in mind, both of these lenses are also f2, and if you can have one lens that handles your wider shots at 28-70, and then a 50-150 handling your tighter shots, that sounds pretty darn good to me. Now, we just need Sony to release a 14-28 f2, or let's be honest, it'll probably be like a 16 or 18mm to 28mm f2, but regardless, we're nearly there. They already have a 14-24mm f2.8. They are so close. Just give us one wider lens with an f2 aperture, Sony, and you will have created a new trinity of lenses that surpass the original trinity from years ago. Regardless, even with just these 2 f2 lenses, Sony is already making a pretty compelling argument for replacing a lot of other lenses in your camera bag, and it's definitely intriguing. That is, if you can afford it. And that does lead us into talking about the price, because this is definitely not a cheap lens and is pushing the price of a normal focal range lens upward. I say normal focal range because, like many lens manufacturers, Sony also makes specialty ultra telephoto lenses like a 600mm that cost $13,000, but whenever you look at their newer lenses like the 28-70 f2 and 70-200 f2.8 Mark II, those most come in at under $3,000. But then you have this new 50-150 f2, and Sony has decided to push the price even higher, with them telling me that it's going to cost somewhere between $3,500 to $3,800 US, which, spoiler by the way, yes, you can go out and purchase a Sony FX3 for approximately the same price. So we're finally reaching the point where a high-end Sony lens for filmmaking now costs as much as a high-end Sony camera. Is it worth it though? Well, of course, that's going to depend on your budget and what your needs are as a filmmaker. If you commonly find yourself using a 50mm, 85, 100mm, 135, etc., and you tally up the cost of buying all of those tighter lenses, and then you are okay with losing some of the light by dropping from, say, an f1.4, f1.8 to an f2, but at the same time being able to have one larger lens that does it all, suddenly this $3,500-ish price point doesn't look so bad. So maybe it's worth it? That choice is going to be up to you. And side note, by the way, I know I'm going to get a lot of comments about another lens as well, so let's talk about it here. Tamron makes a similar lens to this Sony that is a 35-150, but has a variable aperture of f2 to f2.8. But to be clear, that f2 aperture is only good from about 35 to 39 millimeters on the wide end, where it will then switch to f2.2, then f2.4, etc. as you zoom in. So it's definitely not a constant aperture like this one. And here's another big difference, that Tamron is not an internal zoom. That lens actually extends when you zoom it in, and fully zoomed in, it's actually longer than this Sony by 6 millimeters. But the Tamron is wider at 35mm versus 50, and most important of all, at $1,700 at the time of making this video, the Tamron cost less than half of what Sony's going to charge for their 50-150. Now, while I don't have these two lenses to compare side by side, keep in mind that Sony is probably going to have better build quality and be sharper, but even so, I'll try to make this decision for you as easy as possible. If you're on a budget and you want a really pretty much all-in-one lens, I know tons of filmmakers that absolutely love the Tamron, and that seems like a no-brainer. But if you have the money, if you're wanting an all-in-one lens that essentially replaces a lot of tighter prime lenses, and if you want exceptional lens quality, internal zoom, etc., this 50-150 f2 is arguably still a great choice too. Speaking of a great choice, another great choice for you would be to download my wedding filmmaker gear guide in the video description. This guide is completely free and it's going to show you all the camera gear that I recommend you purchase for filming a wedding, not just lenses like this one. So if you're trying to build out your kit and you want some advice, please download this guide for free at the link in the video description. Also, please like and subscribe if you want to see more lens reviews and tutorials for filmmakers in the future. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.